It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
There is so much research that shows that this is important, and having dad's involvement is super important as well. Having positive role models for your daughter matters an enormous amount in terms of the decisions that she's going to make.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson, the founder of happyfamilies.com.au and the parenting expert and co-hosts behind the TV show Parental Guidance on Channel 9. That TV show, by the way, is still available on 9 now on Catch Up. Everywhere I've been travelling lately, I've been all over the country over the last couple of weeks, running seminars and presentations and workshops for parents, and people keep on saying, love the show. And then everyone else in the room says, can I still see it? And the answer is yes, you can see it on Channel 9 now on the app on Catch Up, and it's worth watching. I'm here today with the love of my life, Mrs. Happy Families, Kylie, mum to our 6 children. And Kylie,
Did you just say I was the love of your life?
I tell you that all the time, and I just said it on the podcast. Yes, yes, it just came out.
So I picked up a friend the other night,
yeah,
and you and I were talking, and you said goodbye to me, and you literally said those words.
Oh, did I?
You did.
Okay.
And I hung up the phone, and she kind of was quiet for a minute, and she said, "Did he just say that you were the love of his life?"
Yeah, right.
And I said, "Yeah."
You just take it for granted, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. What did she say? She didn't know that you were going to mention this.
No, she just sat there.
You didn't even tell me this story. So what did she say?
She was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's so beautiful. And then we started having another conversation. She said, sorry, I'm still stuck back there where your husband said you're the love of his life.
You just take it for granted?
I don't take it for granted at all, but it really took her by surprise.
Wow. My heart's a little bit sad that you've shared that somebody would be so surprised that a husband would say that to his wife, because I don't know. I mean, I'd probably say something like that 30 times a day to you.
Well, we've had this conversation before, but my registration number on my car says BDAS.
Yeah, BDAS. And everyone thinks.
Everyone thinks that it stands for badass.
I can't believe you just said that.
But it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
And so I said to her, that's just like my number plate. I said, everybody thinks that, that's what it stands for. I said, but it actually stands for beautiful, darling, angel, sweetheart. And she looked at me and she said, say that again. So I said it to her again, and she's actually using her fingers to go B.
B for beautiful, D for darling, A for angel.
It all out. Yeah. And she said, and he calls you that. And I said, yeah, every time I answer the phone. And she was just like, wow, aren't you lucky? Like, it was a really big deal to her.
Yeah, see, this is making me feel good. This is giving me a big ego boost. And now it's public. Now we've got we get about 3 million downloads a year on this podcast, and all of those people are now hearing how crazy I am about you, and I think that is fabulous. Now, that's not what this podcast is about, though. This is a podcast that is about kids and girlfriends and boyfriends, particularly in sort of the mid to late primary school years.
Well, I'm going to suggest it actually is.
Oh, well,
a wonderful preface.
Maybe it is.
Because in order to have the kind of relationship that we have, the things that we talk about today are really foundational. They're so important.
Before we dive into this podcast, though, we do need to give you a content warning. We're going to talk about some pretty significant issues when it comes to themes related to intimacy. Parental guidance is definitely recommended. This is a mature content, mature audience discussion that we're going to be having around kids and what's happening in the playground when it comes to their love interests. So with that warning offered, let's answer our listener question, which is...
Kate has actually asked, my husband and I are hoping that you could offer some advice with our 10-year-old daughter. She's in year 5, and we've recently discovered that she has a friend who is a boy who is now being labelled as her boyfriend. They send messages to one another, and those messages have escalated in the last couple of weeks to lots of lip emojis, heart emojis, and those 3 words, I love you. The boy has also asked our daughter what more she would like with the relationship that they have. She has said that it would be nice if they could talk to each other at school. He would like to kiss her, to hug her, and to take her to the movies. They are 10. Our question to you is this age appropriate? Should we intervene? And what is the best way for us to approach this with her?
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you a question that you might not want to answer. But how old were you when you had your first kiss?
Well, first kiss, it was on the cheek.
Right.
This is a bit of a theme in my life because our first kiss was on the cheek.
Yes, it was, yes.
But I was 10.
10?
Yeah, we were about to leave from New Zealand to move to Australia. My grandfather had a heart attack, and so we actually relocated so we could take care of him.
Right.
And I was heartbroken because the boy that I liked, he was a few years older than me. But I had to tell him that I was leaving, and it felt like we were breaking up forever.
And you weren't even boyfriend or girlfriend?
We weren't even boyfriend and girlfriend.
But this was it?
Yeah, so I sat down with him.
I'm so sorry you ended up with second place with me.
Our parents were youth leaders at the time, and so I was with him at the youth group that night, and I told him that we were leaving, and I was an absolute mess. I was sobbing. It was a really big deal. And he gave me a little kiss on the cheek.
Really? Was it consensual? Like, did he ask?
I don't think he asked, but I was really happy for him.
Right. I'm looking at the grin on your face, and I'm feeling a little bit insecure right now. Okay, so let's get to the guts of Kate's email. Is it okay for
you're going to put me in the spot, but you're not going to tell?
Oh, you beat me by years. You beat me by years. I think I would have been 13 or 14 before I had my first kiss.
But it wasn't on the cheek, was it?
Yes, it actually was. I was on a surfing trip to a place called Mungo Brush on the New South Wales sort of mid-north coast, and there were some girls camping nearby with their family, and one of my mates was just crazy about these girls and got in a big argument with them about how they wouldn't kiss him because they were frigid, because that's what you used to say when you were that age, and they said not frigid at all, and then they came over and one of them planted a big kiss on my cheek.
Oh, so was that consensual?
I had no idea that it was coming, but I was very happy she did it, especially since he didn't get one. But she never gave me any more. That was it.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, my first real kiss didn't happen until I was 17.
Okay, well, yeah, let's move on. So I want to answer Kate's question and talk about a couple of things that are happening right now when it comes to kids in primary school, grades sort of 4, 5, and 6. Everywhere that I go, as I'm giving talks, whether it's in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, South Australia, the regional centres. I mean, I've been in Perth recently. No matter where I go, one of the questions that I ask the school principals is, so what are the biggest challenges that you're dealing with right now? Overwhelmingly, they say screens. Screens are a huge issue. And when I ask for more information, they say things like mainly boys, but kids generally, sharing explicit content, sharing pornography, and sharing memes, and liking and promoting and encouraging those memes and raising the stakes with that sort of stuff. The more we talk about it, the more I'm seeing a pattern of behavior, and that is that it's primarily the boys that are doing it. There's some sort of status associated with it. There's some sort of societal pressure that they're applying to one another in the playground. It's like there's this boy code, something that a Harvard researcher called William Pollock wrote about years ago. There's this boy code that's pushing them to up the stakes. So as a response to that, what's also happening is that because boys are being exposed to explicit content, they're showing increased levels of pressure. And because of the pressure in the playground to be a certain kind of boy, they are putting more pressure on girls to be a lot more serious in their relationships than we might be comfortable with as parents. But I want to stress, even though this is the consistent conversation that school principals are having with me and that school counsellors are having with me, I don't think that it's a breathtakingly big departure from what was happening when we were growing up. And the reason that I say that is because when I was growing up and going to Niagara Park Public School as a grade 5 kid, that's when I was first introduced to the idea, and this is where, if your children are listening, you definitely want to press pause. I was introduced to the idea of fingering. I didn't know what it was. I wasn't involved in it, but I discovered that some of the year 5 and year 6 kids were going down to the back of the oval where there were no teachers, and they were engaging in that kind of...
Really?
Yeah, in primary school. So this is back in the 1980s, mid-1980s. And as I talk to, as I said, school leaders, this kind of behaviour is still happening. In fact, I think the behaviour is probably happening a little bit less, but I also think that there's greater knowledge and more pressure now. I don't have data to support that. I just want to emphasise this stuff was happening in primary school, in the mid to late years of primary school, and it has been happening for decades.
I know that by the time I was in high school, I was definitely associating with girls who were sexually active with their boyfriends who were
usually a couple of years older
than them. But I think that for the most part, I lived a pretty sheltered life, in part, predominantly, I would suggest, because of the way my parents sheltered me.
Yeah. And this is one of the critical things. We've got Kate who's saying, I want to shelter my child. I want to keep her safe.
So do you think it's appropriate for a 10-year-old boy to be asking a girl if he can hug and kiss her?
I think that it's developmentally appropriate, but there's got to be...
Do you really think it's a developmentally appropriate that he would ask that? I don't. I actually don't. I don't think as a 10-year-old that's a question that you would be asking. I do remember, I would have been maybe 7. I'm going to say 7. There was a boy in the street and he said to me, I'll show you mine if you show me yours.
Yes.
I do remember that kind of dialogue. But to actually be physically connected, intimate, I don't think I had those literally, I was with a boy who was a few years older. It's a totally different scenario than 2 10-year-olds.
So the reason I paused is because while I think that it's developmentally appropriate, what I was trying to find the words for was, but it depends on what kind of hug and kiss, what kind of relationship they're actually looking for, and where the inspiration for that is coming. We know that sexual identity begins somewhere around about 3 or 4. That's when kids start to recognize what a boy is and what a girl is, and they start to identify with the expectations, the social norms, the roles that they have been socialized into or are being socialized into. We also know that around about the age of 6, 7, 8, those crushes really start to kick up. I mean, they're really quite strong, even in those early to mid primary school years. And we know that kids start to get interested in having some kind of physical contact, usually in a platonic kind of way, but there's an interest in exploration, even if it hasn't come from a pornography-inspired context, somewhere around about the age of 9, 10, 11. That's not an unusual thing.
I'm thinking about the kinds of TV shows that the kids are watching at those ages and their teenage drama.
Yeah, so tweens are watching the teens? That's right.
Literally watching the teens and watching those crushes unfold on the screen and watching their first kiss and how they ruminate over that. And so it kind of grooms them in some ways, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I guess grooms or models is probably a better word for it. I think Michelle Mitchell's book Tweens is actually quite useful here for Kate and other people who are wondering about what to do. But there's one more thing that I want to talk about before we answer specifically the 3 things that I think every parent needs to do when you're worried about a childhood crush getting too serious. There's one more thing in Kate's email where she says that they're sending each other emojis. And my concern is, what are they doing on the phone? See, I've got a really big bee in my bonnet about kids getting access to smartphones way too early. The more access they have, especially when it's unfettered access, they can do whatever they want. The more access they have to the device, the more access they have to the relationship. And the more access they have to the relationship, the more it intensifies. And there's something about the depersonalization of the phone where you've got the distance between you that reduces inhibitions and increases the bravery, the requests, the expectations in that relationship. The distance kind of makes it feel safer to say things, do things, send things that you wouldn't in person.
Well, I guess reading between the lines, you've got a kid who's asking a question and she's saying, I'd like to talk at school. So I'm going to suggest that there's actually more communication going on via screen than there is actually in person.
That's a concern that I have, and that's why I wanted to raise the phone. Yeah. They're sending each other emojis, which is, I know that it's how kids communicate, but it's not deep, high-quality communication. And this brings me to the conversation that I think answers the question, and we're only going to spend 2 minutes on it because there's not a whole lot to say. Number 1, you need to talk as a parent with your children early and often when it comes to issues of intimacy, when it comes to issues of consent, when it comes to issues of safety, when it comes to issues of relationships. Talking to them about what a boyfriend is or what a girlfriend is or what a romantic interest is and what that means at different ages.
I think before you even get to that, you need to understand what they think it is.
Well, that's part of the conversation. Yes, I'm saying talk to, but
I think it's really important that we understand before we go in with guns blazing. We actually find out, what does it mean to be a boyfriend?
And Kate's done that. Like you can hear, Kate says, "What do you want?" And her daughter says, "Well, I want to talk at school." And what does he want? He wants hugging and kissing and movie dates. So he's just pushing for stuff that I wouldn't want to see happening realistically until 15 or 16. He's just 4 or 5 years ahead of the curve, 6 years ahead of the curve. But having that conversation with your kids and saying, what do you think's appropriate, inviting them into the conversation, explore what they think, explain what you think and why, and then develop solutions together. It's the standard 3 E's of effective discipline. To me, that's going to be your most important protective factor. Being involved. There is so much research that shows that this is important, and having dad's involvement is super important as well. Having positive role models for your daughter matters an enormous amount in terms of the decisions that she's going to make.
Not only that, just having an insight to the way a male brain works as well, I think is really important. I remember mum and dad sitting me down and telling me about, a boy's anatomy and how it works and how it responds. And obviously it wasn't until you and I were well and truly married that it all started to click into place. And I was like, oh, they were right. But I had no idea the power that my body had on the way your body responded at all. It didn't, in my mind, there was no correlation. And yet, obviously, once you're in an intimate relationship, you recognize and see just how responsive our bodies are to one another. But I think for me as a mum, and I guess because of the personal journey that I've taken, I want to help my girls understand why their body feels the way it feels. Actually unpack that, because knowledge is power, right? We have these emotions, we have these feelings that surface in our bodies because of the way we are responding to the person in front of us. And it feels overwhelming, it feels scary. And at times we feel like that means I must have to act. If I'm feeling this way, then that means I love him. Or if I'm feeling that way, then that means that I actually have to do something about it. But empowering our girls to understand that they can feel this and it's all normal and it's all natural. And yet it's so important that they actually listen to what their body's telling them.
So we didn't plan this, but that's my second key idea. You've kind of incorporated that into the issue that the point that we need to talk, and we need to talk early and often, and we need to talk about relationships. The second thing that I was going to say, I guess just to put a nice big highlighter through what you've just said, is that we want to encourage our kids, especially in this case, our daughters. They're more likely to have the anxiety around this. Boys do tend to be the accelerator, girls do tend to be the brake. And the reason that they're the brake is because the costs for them, both socially but also physically, the costs for them, if this goes too far too fast, are substantial compared to the costs for a boy. And the anxiety that she feels is healthy and normal, and it's an important signal to her that she needs to keep this going as slowly as she can until the anxiety goes away, because the anxiety only drops when she knows she can absolutely trust this person. So the anxiety is high because there's a question of trust. Over time, as he proves his trustworthiness, the anxiety drops off and then the relationship can build. And that's not going to happen with a 10-year-old. The anxiety is there because it's developmentally appropriate. It's saying, whoa, brakes, what's going on here?
For me, I think it's just so important for us to help our children understand, and specifically our girls, their worth, and that it's not related to how a boy feels about them.
Brilliant.
If they can understand that and recognize that what they have, themselves, their person, their body, is so precious and so valuable.
Love it.
And it's only to be given to the most trustworthy person.
Great.
We're going to be doing our girls a favor.
My last point is we want to teach our kids to delay. There's simply no evidence that shows that starting these romantic relationships early ends up being beneficial in the long run. It's better to wait. Full stop, end of story. So if I was to pull all this together, because we are absolutely, completely beyond out of time, the kind of behavior that's being demonstrated here by this boy is pretty normal for boys that age. It's not ideal, but it is pretty normal. It has been pretty normal for several decades. It's not unusual, but I'm concerned that the inspiration for the behavior has changed over the last few decades, and there is a much darker side to it now than perhaps there was way back in the 1980s. I could be wrong about that, but certainly that's my first concern. Second concern, telephone usage. Like, just minimize the telephone usage, and there has to be time away. Unfortunately, the ever-present nature of the phones means that the relationship is ever-present. And then our big ideas. Number one, talk early and often. Number two, listen to the anxiety and follow that because it's keeping you safe and healthy. And number three, delay. And your big point that covers all of this is you're worth something regardless of what a boy thinks about you. It's been really nice to have this conversation. I hope that it's been helpful. Thanks so much for listening. If you have feedback for us, podcasts at happyfamilies.com.au. That's podcasts with an S at happyfamilies.com.au. Same with your questions. We love getting your listener questions. Podcasts at happyfamilies.com.au. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Ruan from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. For more information about making your family happier or to become a Happy Families member today and help to support the work that we're doing so that we can continue to offer as many free resources as we can and help as many families as we can, please visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.